When we talk about avoidance, most people assume they disappear because they don't care. But that's not true. They run because control is their oxygen. Their distance is not about you. It's about them needing to feel like they are steering their own ship, that no one has the power to dictate their emotions. And the greatest illusion an avoidant builds is this: as long as I hold the steering wheel, I'm safe. Now here's the paradox. Control doesn't equal peace. Control equals confinement. Think about it. What happens to a person who spends their entire life running from intimacy just to protect themselves? They become a prisoner of their own escape route. And here's where the turning point begins. The moment you stop chasing, you shatter their illusion of control. Because control only exists when there's someone on the other end reacting to it. Let me give you an example. If an avoidant pulls back and you chase, they feel powerful. They get to dictate the rhythm. But if they pull back and you stay still, if you don't run after them, don't beg for answers, don't plead for closeness, suddenly they're not controlling the rhythm anymore. You are. And that loss of control doesn't just irritate them. It terrifies them because it introduces something they hate but can't resist: curiosity. Curiosity is dangerous to an avoidant. Why? Because curiosity is the beginning of engagement. It's the seed of connection. It forces the mind to dwell on the very thing it tried to escape. When you go silent, you become the unanswered question in their psychology. You are no longer predictable, and unpredictability is like an itch they can't scratch. See, human beings are wired for certainty. We want to know where things stand. And avoidance, as much as they pretend otherwise, crave certainty even more because it makes them feel safe. But the second you disrupt the pattern, when you remove yourself from the chase, you become the one thing they cannot categorize, and that unsettles their nervous system. They start thinking, wait, why aren't they running after me? Why aren't they begging for me back? What does this mean? Did I misjudge them? Have they already moved on? Notice what just happened. Their brain shifted from certainty to questions, from control to curiosity, and curiosity is far more powerful than fear, because fear pushes people away, but curiosity pulls them in. Now, don't misunderstand me here. You're not playing games. This isn't manipulation. It's simply the reality of what happens when you reclaim your power. You're no longer feeding the avoidance illusion. You're forcing them to sit in the unknown. And the unknown, ironically, is what finally begins to dismantle their walls. This is why so many of you who've gone no contact notice something strange after a while. At first, the avoidant seems relieved, like your silence gave them exactly what they wanted: space. But then, slowly, something starts to shift. They begin orbiting again. A text out of nowhere, a like on your post, a random call just to check in. Why? Because the silence has turned into a magnet. They thought control would give them freedom, but all it gave them was emptiness. Here's what you must understand. Avoidants don't come back because you begged, or because you chased, or because you convinced them of your worth. They come back because your silence stripped them of control and replaced it with curiosity. And curiosity is relentless. It wakes them up at night. It follows them into their workday. It lingers in their subconscious. It gnaws at the walls they built around themselves. And sooner or later, that curiosity overrides their fear. They realize the only way to quiet the noise in their mind is to return to the very source they tried to escape. That's you. So the next time you find yourself tempted to chase, to explain, to prove, remember this truth: the power is not in pursuit. It's in presence. It's in having the strength to withhold reaction, to let silence do the heavy lifting. Because silence doesn't just create distance. Silence creates mystery. And mystery is the one thing stronger than their need for control. Never forget that. Control may push them away, but curiosity will always pull them back. When an avoidant leaves, they convince themselves it's clean. They tell themselves they've cut the cord, that they've escaped without consequence. But here's the reality no one talks about. Every relationship leaves behind an emotional debt. And debt doesn't disappear just because you walk away. It waits. It grows interest. It demands to be paid. Think about it. Every conversation that ended halfway, every promise left unfulfilled, every glance, every touch, every unspoken word, those things don't just vanish. They stay in the subconscious like unpaid bills piling up on a desk. And the avoidant, no matter how cold they seem, knows on some level those bills exist. They may not want to acknowledge it, but the debt keeps tugging at them in quiet moments. This is why avoidance never truly feels like freedom. You'll hear them say, "I just needed space." But what they're really saying is, "I wanted to escape the weight of connection." And for a while, that feels liberating. But the longer they're gone, the more the emotional debt starts creeping back in. The silence they wanted so badly becomes an echo chamber. And in that silence, their mind starts whispering, "What about the way they looked at you? What about the things you left unsaid? What about the part of you that felt alive when you were with them?" The debt can take many forms. For some, it shows up as guilt. For others, it's nostalgia. Sometimes it's pure longing. But no matter how it manifests, the principle is always the same. You cannot outrun what is unfinished. The avoidant believes that distance erases, but distance actually magnifies. It sharpens the contrast between what they had and what they lost. Here's the key. Emotional debt doesn't just pull them back toward you. It forces them into a confrontation with themselves. Because when they left, they thought they were leaving you behind. What they didn't realize is that they were leaving behind pieces of themselves. The version of them that felt safe with you. The version of them that felt seen. The version of them that touched intimacy and ran because it scared them. Those pieces don't die just because they walked away. They remain demanding attention. And over time, that demand becomes unbearable. Why? Because human beings are wired for completion. Our brains crave closure. It's the reason an unfinished song haunts you, the reason an unresolved conflict eats at your mind. Psychologists call it the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency to remember incomplete tasks more than completed ones. An avoidant relationship is one big unfinished task. It lingers. It pulls at them in ways they can't suppress. This is why so many of you have experienced the boomerang effect. Out of nowhere, months later, you hear from them. Not because they suddenly found courage, not because they figured everything out, but because the debt came knocking and ignoring it became harder than facing it. Now here's where it gets powerful. You cannot pay their debt for them. That's the mistake most people make. They try to reopen communication, chase after closure, or smooth over the rough edges. But all that does is delay the process. An avoidant must feel the weight of their own unfinished business. They must wrestle with it in silence until the pull becomes stronger than their fear. And let me be clear, their return is not always about romance. Sometimes it's about validation. Sometimes it's about testing whether the door is still open. But make no mistake, the fact that they return at all proves the principle: emotional debt cannot be escaped. It demands repayment. And repayment requires reconnection, even if just for a moment. This is where your power lies, because the less you interfere, the heavier the debt becomes for them. Your absence forces them to sit in the discomfort of their own choices. Your silence amplifies the reality that the weight is theirs to carry. And when they finally reach the point where the weight is unbearable, they will come back, not out of pity, not out of convenience, but because the human mind cannot leave something unfinished forever. So the next time you ask yourself, why did they come back? Remember this: it wasn't your pleading, your effort, or your endless patience. It was the weight of the debt they created when they left. It was the pull of unresolved connection, the haunting silence of unfinished love. That's what brought them back. And here's the truth you must hold on to. Emotional debt doesn't just call them back to you, it calls them back to themselves. Because when they face you again, They're not just facing a person they once loved. They're facing the part of themselves they tried to abandon. And that confrontation is what finally cracks the armor. So never forget this: the heart can lie, the mind can rationalize, but the soul always knows when something is unfinished. And that knowing has the power to pull even the most avoidant person back into your orbit. One of the greatest shocks to an avoidant isn't when you cry, it isn't when you beg, and it isn't when you try to prove your love. They expect that. They anticipate it. They build their defenses assuming that when they walk away, you'll still be there waiting, orbiting their world like a satellite that never leaves its track. That sense of guarantee is what fuels their confidence. They don't fear losing you because deep down, they assume you're too invested to ever disappear. But here's where everything changes. The moment you stop chasing, the moment you reclaim your energy and pull back, you disrupt that guarantee. You send a shockwave through their nervous system, because suddenly what they thought was permanent is gone. What they believed was safe is now at risk. And this isn't just inconvenient, it's existential for them. Think about it: an avoidant doesn't truly process the value of connection when it's available. They process it when it's missing. As long as you're present, they can take you for granted. They can dismiss your love as something that will always be there. But the second your absence becomes real, it confronts them with a terrifying possibility. What if I miscalculated? What if I lost the one person who actually mattered? It's like oxygen. You don't notice oxygen when you're breathing normally, but the second it's cut off, you panic. You feel the urgency, the desperation. That's what happens in the mind of the avoidant when you remove yourself from the cycle. They thought you were air they could ignore, and then they realize they can't breathe without what you provided. Now, here's the irony. They left to protect themselves, to prove they didn't need you. But what they never accounted for was the power of scarcity. Scarcity creates value. When something feels abundant, it's overlooked. When it feels rare, it's priceless. Your silence, your decision not to be readily available, transforms you from something ordinary into something irreplaceable. And this is why they come back. Not because they suddenly figured out how to love perfectly, not because they've transformed overnight, but because the shock of losing what felt guaranteed rattles their entire system. They are forced to confront the possibility that they've underestimated you, that you're not the passive, waiting figure they imagined, that you're stronger than their avoidance. That realization does something powerful. It destabilizes their sense of control. Remember, control is their comfort zone. If they can predict you, they can feel safe. If they know you'll always answer, they don't have to fear losing you. But when you show them that you're not guaranteed, you take away their safety net. And suddenly, they're not in control. You are. This shock doesn't just create fear, it creates longing. Because now they're replaying everything in their head. They're asking, why didn't they chase me? Do they not care anymore? Have I already been replaced? Did I just throw away the best thing I ever had? Those questions grow louder the longer you stay silent, and that inner dialogue is what drives them back. But here's the deeper layer. At the core of every avoidant is a paradox. They desperately want closeness, but they fear it. As long as you're guaranteed, the fear dominates. But when your presence is no longer assured, the desire takes over. Their longing finally outweighs their fear. And when that balance tips, the return becomes inevitable. Now, you need to understand something crucial. Their coming back is not about weakness. It's about awakening. Because in that moment of shock, they see you differently. You are no longer the person they assumed they could control. You are no longer the guarantee they took for granted. You've proven that you have the strength to walk away. And ironically, that strength is what makes you magnetic. It's the same in every aspect of life. We value what is rare, we respect what is strong, and we chase what we fear losing. The avoidant is no different. They don't wake up to their feelings until the guarantee is gone. And when it is, they are forced to step out of their avoidance, even if only for a moment, to try to reclaim what they thought would always be there. So the next time you find yourself questioning, why haven't they noticed my worth? Remind yourself, people don't notice worth when it's guaranteed. They notice it when it's absent. And your power lies not in proving yourself, but in being willing to remove yourself. Because the truth is this: when you stop being a guarantee, you start being a choice. And that shift is what forces the avoidant to confront reality. The shock of losing what they thought was permanent is often the very thing that finally pulls them back. Never forget, sometimes the greatest act of love isn't in holding on, but in showing the strength to let go. Every avoidant builds walls. It's not accidental, it's intentional. These walls are not physical, but psychological fortresses, constructed brick by brick through years of self-protection. They are built out of fear, out of the belief that closeness is dangerous, that vulnerability is a trap, and that to truly let someone in means to lose control. So what do? They build distance into their identity. They convince themselves that walls will keep them safe. But here's the truth nobody tells them: walls don't just keep danger out, they keep life out. Those very defenses they cling to become prisons. And this is where the turning point always comes. Because for a while, the avoidant feels secure behind their barriers. They think, I don't need anyone. I'm fine alone. But over time, the silence inside those walls becomes unbearable. Let's be real. A wall cannot block out longing. It cannot suffocate memory. It cannot erase the human need for connection. All it can do is delay it. And what happens when you delay a need long enough? The pressure builds. Just like steam trapped inside a sealed container, the emotions they've been avoiding start pressing against the walls they built. They tell themselves they don't miss you, but at night, when no one's around, the thoughts slip through. They tell themselves they don't care, but their body remembers the way they laughed with you, the way you made them feel seen, the way you gave them something their walls never could: belonging. That's the flaw in the avoidant strategy. You can build walls, but you can't erase your humanity. You can run from people, but you can't run from yourself. And eventually, the walls they trusted start to crumble, not because you pushed them, not because you demanded it, but because pressure from the inside always breaks faster than force from the outside. This is why silence is so powerful. When you stop banging on their walls, when you stop trying to force your way in, you allow them to feel the weight of their own confinement. They start to realize that what they thought was freedom is actually loneliness. What they thought was safety is actually isolation. And slowly, the cost of those walls becomes higher than the fear that built them. Think about it. A wall may protect you from rejection, but it also locks you away from intimacy. It may shield you from pain, but it also blocks joy. The avoidant doesn't realize this at first because fear blinds them. But when you step back, when you stop feeding their avoidance with pursuit, you give them no distractions. They're left with the raw truth of their own emptiness. And emptiness is a powerful teacher. It whispers louder than words. It gnaws at the soul. It forces the avoidant to confront the question they've spent their whole life running from. What am I protecting myself from? And is it worth the price of being alone? That's when the cracks begin to show. And once a crack forms in the wall, the whole structure becomes unstable. A memory slips in. A longing grows stronger. A flash of regret takes hold. And soon, the wall they built to stay safe becomes the very thing that collapses under the weight of their own hidden desires. When they come back, it's not because the wall disappeared overnight. It's because the pressure inside became greater than the fear outside. They return because the cost of isolation finally outweighed the risk of connection. And here's the part you need to remember. You didn't have to break down their wall. You simply had to stop trying, step back, and let the wall destroy itself. This is why holding your silence is so powerful. because it allows nature to do its work. Pressure builds, cracks form, and eventually, the very defenses they clung to become unbearable. And when that moment comes, they don't just return to you out of desire, they return out of necessity. So the lesson is clear. You don't win by tearing down someone's defenses. You win by refusing to be trapped inside them. You win by letting the walls collapse under their own weight. And when they finally crumble, when the avoidant realizes the prison they built is too heavy to carry, they will step back into your world. Not because you demanded it, but because their own heart left them no choice. And that's the paradox of love with an avoidant. They run to protect themselves, but in the end, it's the very walls they built that drive them back. So hold your ground, because sometimes the strongest act of love is to stop trying to climb their walls and let them discover for themselves that freedom was never behind them. It was always in front of them, waiting with you. Memory, it's the one thing the avoidant cannot outrun. They can escape your presence, they can avoid your calls, they can block you on every platform if they want. But they cannot block the unconscious mind. And the unconscious mind is relentless. It doesn't care about their logic. It doesn't care about their walls. It doesn't care about the story they tell themselves about not needing you. All it takes is a trigger, and suddenly, the very connection they tried to bury comes flooding back with more force than they ever expected. That's the secret. Avoidants don't come back because they suddenly wake up one morning with courage. They come back because memory ambushes them. A song comes on the radio and they're instantly back in the car with you. They pass by a restaurant and smell the food, and for a second, it's as if they can hear your laughter across the table. They catch the faintest scent of a perfume, and suddenly they're standing in a moment they thought they had erased. You see, the human brain is wired for association. Every experience is anchored by the senses, and love especially imprints deeply. You can deny it in words, but your body remembers. The nervous system remembers. So while the avoidant tries to silence it, life will always find a way to remind them. And those reminders don't fade with distance. They grow sharper with absence, because the less accessible you are in reality, the more potent you become in memory. This is why time works differently for the one who avoids. For you, time might feel like healing. For them, time often becomes haunting. The longer they go without you, the stronger the contrast becomes between what they feel in solitude and what they once felt with you. And the mind cannot help but compare. That comparison is not something you can force. It happens naturally, often when they least expect it. But here's the deeper truth. Memory isn't just nostalgia. It isn't just replaying good times. Memory is identity. We are shaped by the moments that mattered most to us. And when an avoidant thinks back to you, even against their will, they are reminded of a version of themselves they can't access alone. You represent more than a person. You represent a state of being they lost when they walked away. Safety, joy, intimacy, aliveness. And here's where it gets powerful. You can't erase identity. You can distract yourself. You can numb yourself. But the deeper truth always resurfaces. The avoidant may suppress those memories for a season, but eventually suppression turns into exhaustion. And when their mind gets tired of running, the memories return stronger than ever. This time not as whispers, but as demands. This is why silence and distance are so crucial. If you chase, you give them no room to feel the absence. If you explain, you rescue them from the confrontation. But if you hold your ground, you force them into a direct collision with their own memory. And that collision is powerful enough to shake the very walls they built. Because think about it. If the memories didn't matter, why would they come back? If you were forgettable, they would have erased you already. But they don't erase you because they can't. You're tied to a part of them they're terrified to lose. And no amount of avoidance can change that. The irony is this: the avoidant runs because they fear pain, but it's memory that brings them the greatest pain of all. They run to protect themselves, Yet their own mind betrays them, and the more they try to ignore it, the louder it gets, until finally they realize there's only one way to quiet the storm inside, to return, to reconnect, to revisit the very place where the memory was born. So if you've ever wondered why they reach out after weeks, months, sometimes even years, the answer is simple. Memory became louder than fear, and when memory wins, avoidance fails. But let me leave you with this insight: memory is not just their prison, it's your proof. Proof that what you had was real. Proof that no wall, no silence, no distance can erase true connection. And proof that the seeds you planted in love will always grow roots, even in the most avoidant of hearts. So don't fear their silence. Don't fear their running, because life has a way of sending them back to the very thing they tried to escape. And when that moment comes, it won't be because you chased. It will be because memory pulled them in a way nothing else could. That's the power of what you shared. That's the force they cannot escape. At the core of every avoidant silence is one hidden fear they rarely admit, even to themselves. It's not the fear of closeness, not the fear of losing control, but the fear of becoming irrelevant. Because for an avoidant, distance only works as long as they believe they still hold a place in your world. They can live with separation, but they cannot live with erasure. In the beginning, when they pull away, they convince themselves you'll always be thinking of them. That even if you're hurt, even if you're angry, they still occupy real estate in your mind. And as long as they feel relevant, their avoidance feels safe. They think, I can disappear, and they'll still be there. That belief is what gives them confidence to run. But something happens when you stop feeding that illusion. When your silence is consistent, not out of spite, but out of strength, they start to question their place in your life. And for the avoidant, that question is terrifying, because it doesn't just challenge their relationship with you, it challenges their sense of self. Think about it. Human beings are wired to matter. From the time we're children, our identity is built on recognition, the smile from a parent, the approval of a teacher, the attention of a friend. To be ignored, to be irrelevant, is not just uncomfortable, it's existential. It cuts at the root of belonging. And no matter how independent or detached someone pretends to be, they still carry that primal need to know they matter. This is why your silence carries so much power. At first, it feels like space to them. But as time passes, silence becomes evidence. Evidence that maybe they're not as central as they believed. Evidence that maybe life goes on without them. And evidence that maybe, just maybe, they were never as indispensable as they imagined. That realization shakes them to their core. The avoidant's greatest fear is not losing you, it's being forgotten by you. And that's when they come back. Not because they suddenly conquered all their fears, not because they've transformed overnight, but because the possibility of irrelevance is too heavy to bear. The idea that you could move forward, build your life, and no longer think of them. This is the nightmare that forces their return. Now here's where the psychology gets interesting. When someone fears abandonment, they cling. When someone fears irrelevance, they test. That's why avoidants so often reappear with small gestures. A random message, a social media, like a subtle attempt to see if you'll respond. They're not just reaching out. They're checking, do I still matter? Am I still relevant in your world? And if you respond with desperation, you reinforce their illusion. They feel secure again, and their avoidance continues. But if you hold steady, if you respond with calm, or even choose not to respond at all, you force them deeper into the confrontation. They can no longer rely on old assumptions. They're left wrestling with the question, what if I lost my place entirely? That's the moment where their walls weaken, because the fear of closeness is nothing compared to the terror of being irrelevant. One is uncomfortable, the other is identity shattering. And when identity is threatened, people act. They come back, they fight for recognition, they re-engage with the very person they tried to escape. Because deep down, They would rather risk intimacy than face the abyss of being forgotten. And here's the paradox. You don't achieve this by punishing them. You achieve it by standing in your own strength, by refusing to revolve around them, by building a life so full and radiant that their absence stops defining you. The more you shine without them, the more their fear of irrelevance grows, because nothing unsettles an avoidant more than watching you thrive without them. This is why your silence isn't weakness. It's leadership. It teaches them a lesson they could never learn while you were chasing. It shows them, in no uncertain terms, that love is not guaranteed. That presence is not permanent. That relevance must be earned, not assumed. So when they finally return, it's not simply because they miss you. It's because they've realized the most painful truth of all. Life does not stop for them. And if they don't step back into your world, they risk being erased from it completely. That is the breaking point. That is what finally drives the avoidant back. So let me leave you with this. Never underestimate the power of your silence, your growth, your refusal to make someone else the center of your existence. Because the fear of irrelevance is stronger than the fear of intimacy. And when you show an avoidant that you can live and thrive without them, you ignite the very fear that pulls them back. Sometimes the most powerful way to make someone realize your value is not by proving it, but by showing them you don't need to.